President Johnson is making his first State of the Union speech to a joint session of the Congress. The President last spoke to a joint session on November 27th, 5 days after President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. Today's speech is less than 3,000 words, making it, by White House accounts, the shortest State of the Union message since Franklin D. Roosevelt's in 1934. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
This budget and this year's legislative program are designed to help each and every American citizen fulfill his basic his hopes for a fair chance to make good, his hopes for fair play from the law, his hopes for a full-time job on full-time pay, his hopes for a decent home for his family in a decent community, his hopes for a good school for his children with good teachers, and his hopes for security when faced with sickness or unemployment or old age. Unfortunately, many Americans live on the outskirts of hope, some because of their poverty and some because of their color, and all too many because of both. Our task is to help replace their despair with opportunity. And this administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America.
All right. Hi, everybody. Glad you are with us here today. My name is Denise Harlow. I'm CEO of the National Community Action Partnership. Excited to be with you today. Today is the 60th anniversary of the signing of the Economic Opportunity Act by President Johnson. Many of us who've been in community action for years know the momentous moment we sit in here today. And those of us who may be newer to community action, I hope that you feel the energy, the care, the love, the respect for this moment. No other time in our country's history have we declared war on poverty. And we in community action are the ones who are holding that banner, carrying that flag, working in the fields every day to ensure that no one is forced to endure the hardships of poverty. Thank you so much for being with us here today. A shout out to CAPLAW as well, who is bringing this webinar to you alongside the National Partnership today, as well as to the LBJ Library, Presidential Library in Austin, Texas. Today's webinar has taken a lot of work to kind of get off the ground. We're going to be doing a blend of different things here today. And I just really want to say thank you for everything you do. I know many of you will be with us in Seattle next week, but we thought it was important to hold today's webinar today. Today is the actual anniversary at 10:05. It is 10:05, we believe, in the state of Alaska at the moment. It's 2:05 here on the East Coast. Now was the moment where President Johnson stepped into the Rose Garden, up to that desk. Many of us have seen that picture and will reflect on it again today, and signed the Economic Opportunity Act, creating our nation's just flag in the sand. We're going to do this, America. We're going to end poverty as we know it. So today we have, next slide, please. I want us to start off with acknowledging first our North Star, as our Senior VP, Tiffany Marley, as frames it. We start with equity. We start with where we began in 1964 as part of the civil rights movement. And we start with acknowledging that every community owes its existence and vitality to generations who have contributed their hopes, their dreams, and energy for making the history that has led to this very moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life. and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Next slide, please. And so today, I recognize that this meeting is being held on the lands of the Piscataway people, and I pay my respect both to elders, past and present, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I hope you will reflect on this and acknowledge where you sit across this great land. I'll also further say that we acknowledge that much of what we know about our country today, our culture, our economic growth, our development throughout history and across time has been made possible by the labor of enslaved Africans and their descendants. We acknowledge the labor of those who have fostered the conditions for us to be able to access our current quality of life, those who have gathered, prepared food, and provided essential services every day to get us to this moment in time. Does poverty look the same as it did in 1964? In many places, we know that it does. In many places, poverty looks very different than it did in 1964. We know that technology and geographic shifts and population and demographic shifts have changed since 1964. But what binds us together across this great network is the promise of community action. Say it with me. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. And that's where we are today. You heard President Johnson talk about hope. And you've heard me say this in remarks in the past. Hope is not just this Pollyanna thing. Hope is real. And today we're really excited to bring some opening remarks from our board chair, as well as Mark Atwood Lawrence from the LBJ Library. We're going to be listening to some oral history of the Economic Opportunity Act and the creation of community action. We will take Q&A, so please, please, please put stuff into the chat. We'll do our best to grab it and reflect those questions to our panelists. And then we'll certainly be closing with some final remarks. Next slide. So I am so pleased today to turn our microphone over to Dr. Dalitso Solomoyo, the board chair of the National Community Action Partnership, someone I've known for many, many years. He's the CEO of the Champaign County Regional Planning Commission in Illinois. Dalitso, your leadership matters. It is a blessing to us all, and we are excited to have you here today. We welcome your words of wisdom.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, Denise, for that very kind introduction. It is indeed an honor and a privilege for me to serve as the chair of the National Community Action Partnership, particularly during this historic time of our movement. So on this historic day, we commemorate 60 years ago, President Lyndon Johnson signed into law the Economic Opportunity Act, which launched the war on poverty and created our movement of community action agencies. We are part of a legacy movement that may have been created by legislation passed by Congress and signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson, but today we are a movement that has been led and sustained by acts of compassion and activism and supported on a bipartisan basis, because in the world's richest economy, poverty is still prevalent 60 years later. Lyndon Baines Johnson, the 36th President of the United States, indeed played a pivotal role in advancing community action programs as part of his broader War on Poverty initiative during the 1960s. Our movement was central to Johnson's Great Society vision, which aimed to eliminate poverty and racial injustice in America. In his 1964 State of the Union address, President Lyndon Johnson presented Congress his blueprint for creating a great society in America. The Great Society was an ideal state envisioned by President Johnson through domestic programs designed to address racial injustice and elimination of poverty. The idea was to empower local communities to tackle poverty at the grassroots level by providing federal funds directly to local community action organizations rather than through state or federal bureaucracies. This approach was intended to give communities the flexibility to address their unique challenges. President Johnson's commitment to the community action approach reflected his belief in the power of government to improve people's lives and his understanding of poverty as a complex issue that required a multifaceted and localized approach. So the Office of Economic Opportunity was a federal agency established in 1964 as part of President Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty. The OEO played a crucial role in coordinating, implementing a wide array of anti-poverty programs designed to address economic inequality and provide opportunities for disadvantaged Americans. The agency was so pivotal to this historic approach to addressing poverty that OEO was a cabinet-level department which worked directly with local agencies to address poverty. The Office of Economic Opportunity was a bold and ambitious effort to tackle poverty in the United States, reflecting the belief that targeted government intervention could make a significant difference in improving the lives of the poor. Today, 60 years later, it is not acceptable to retreat from the front lines of the war on poverty, nor is it acceptable to balance our budgets on the backs of poor people. We need a brazen surge to relaunch the war on poverty. We need legislative initiatives that will be conducive to building more ladders of opportunity for the working poor to climb into the middle class. Let's win the war on poverty before the next 60 years. Thank you and enjoy this webinar today.
Thank you, Delitzo. Appreciate your words of inspiration, history, and a little bit on the future as well. Thank you for that. I see some shout outs coming out in the chat to you as well. So I'm excited to introduce our next speaker. Mark Edward Lawrence is the director of the LBJ Presidential Library Museum located in Austin, Texas. Until late 2019, he taught as professor of history at UT Austin, where his classes focused on American and international history. His most recent book is The End of Ambition: The United States and the Third World in the Vietnam Era, published by Princeton Press. He has published several other books, edited and co-authored books, as well as numerous articles. Mark, we could use your editing skills perhaps and writing skills certainly here at the partnership. Thank you so much for being with us here today. Thank you for being a friend of Community Action. We know that you were involved with TACA's reception a couple weeks ago down in Austin at the library. Shout out to Amanda Shelton, the whole group at the Texas Association for Community Action. And I know you've been a great friend with CAPLAW as well when they hosted their conference in Austin a couple of years ago as well. So Mark, thank you so much for being with us, and I'll turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you so much, Denise, and thank you for those kind words. It's certainly been a pleasure on many occasions in the brief time I've been director of the LBJ Library to have the opportunity to host CAPLAW or other related organizations, and I'm really excited to be with you today. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really a particular pleasure to be with you today because of the way it fits into our ongoing celebrations here at the LBJ Library, both this year and next, of the 60th anniversaries of so many of the Johnson administration's landmark accomplishments. As you may know, President Biden was here just a couple of weeks ago for an event marking the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, surely one of the most transformative pieces of legislation in recent decades of American history. Next year, we'll celebrate the 60th anniversaries of, for example, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the Higher Education Act, Medicare and Medicaid, and of course, many other bills that were passed by the phenomenally productive 89th Congress and signed into law by Lyndon Johnson. But today, of course, we're focused on yet another another vital part of Lyndon Johnson's legacy, the war on poverty, and more specifically, the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, which, as has been mentioned, LBJ signed into law about 60 years and 3 hours ago on August 20th, 1964. And perhaps we could show the first of the photos, the first of the images that I've selected there we go, which is, of course, the signing ceremony that took place outside the White House almost exactly 60 years ago. So here at the LBJ Library, we have several core missions. We are first and foremost an archive, which is to say we process and preserve and make available almost 50 million pages of records from Lyndon Johnson's long political career, and especially, of course, from his presidency. We are also a museum that draws more than 100,000 visitors every year to learn about the Johnson presidency and other subjects that we address through temporary exhibits that come and go every few months. The library also runs a very active education program, welcoming thousands of school kids each year, while also providing professional development opportunities for educators around the state, and thanks to the wonders of Zoom and other technologies increasingly around the country or even the world. And I would invite any and all of you, please, if you've not been to the LBJ Library, or even if you have, come and see us anytime you are in the area. We have, I think, terrific exhibits about the war on poverty and, of course, so many other dimensions of this really consequential presidency. And finally, there's the last of the core missions that I would call attention to, and this is the one that connects most directly to our event today. We at the library serve as a forum where members of the public and all sorts of partner organizations can hold meetings, hear speakers, engage in debate, and deepen our knowledge, not just of history, but also of the crucial issues of the present moment. These activities certainly align very closely with Lyndon Johnson's vision for his library. He wanted this institution to help people look backward over his career and his presidency, of course, but he also wanted the library to be a living, forward-looking institution where ambitious and thoughtful people could gather to consider the present and the future. And today's anniversary is, I think, a perfect opportunity to do a little bit of what LBJ had in mind, to connect the past to the urgent priorities of our own day. Now, I'm a historian, so I think I'll try to set the stage for the rest of our program today by taking us back for a moment to 1964. This was, as Delitzo mentioned, a time when the American economy really boomed as it never had before, arguably as no economy in human history ever had performed before. The nation achieved remarkable rates of growth and perhaps just as remarkably, remarkable rates of social mobility, and poverty was steadily declining. And yet at the same time, about 1/5 of Americans still live below the poverty line. Inspired by Michael Harrington's seminal study entitled The Other America, President Kennedy had tried to focus attention on this nagging problem, but it really fell to LBJ to make it a national priority. The drive to fight poverty was especially evident in the spring of 1964, and here perhaps we can show the second slide, at a time when President Johnson, accompanied by the First Lady, made a trip which was dubbed the Poverty Tour to inspect areas of intractable poverty in West Virginia and other Appalachian states. So here's one of many evocative photos that were taken of LBJ inspecting the homes of poor Appalachian families and sitting on their porches to hear about their lives and to try to understand the challenges that they faced. The problem for Johnson and for the 89th, or I suppose in this case, the 88th Congress, was to figure out how to break down the systemic barriers that prevented the impoverished minority, often located in rural areas like Appalachia, as well, of course, as inner cities, from taking part in the general prosperity. How, in short, could prodigious American resources and expertise be brought to bear to improve the prospects of Americans who lived, as LBJ memorably put it in that State of the Union speech, on the outskirts of hope? And his answer, of course, was the war on poverty that he declared in that speech and that he refined over the following months into the legislation that he signed on August 20th of that year. It was, I think, a revolutionary program in many ways, a broad-based effort to pull vast numbers of impoverished Americans into the mainstream, not by redistributing resources, but by generating opportunity through grassroots programs designed to address the needs of specific communities. In contrast to reform efforts of the progressive era, the war on poverty proposed to engage impoverished people themselves in crafting bottom-up solutions. In contrast to the New Deal, with its focus on the white middle class, the war on poverty proposed to solve problems besetting all Americans, regardless of race or occupation or region. So if historians have been very interested over the years in teasing out the origins and the design of the war on poverty, I also want to mention that scholars have returned again and again to the challenges of assessing the impacts and legacies of the war on poverty down to the present. And I'd like to suggest that a lot of work, I think, remains to be done by historians, political scientists, sociologists, economists, and others to address these really complicated questions of evaluating the effectiveness of these complicated programs. Evidence certainly exists to show, and we highlight this here at the LBJ Library, that the Equal Opportunity Act played a role in significantly reducing poverty in the 1960s and 1970s, and even in some ways down to the present. And yet we have to contend with the fact that poverty was declining anyway in the 1960s, and of course that different war on poverty programs achieved different degrees of success. And we might ask how much greater an impact the war on poverty might have had were it not for that other war, the Vietnam War, which drained resources from the Great Society, as the cartoon that I'll show you right now, the third slide, tends to suggest. And the war as well, I think, unfortunately, helped to turn American politics away from the ambitious liberalism of which the war on poverty was just one component. We also face, of course, the challenge of placing the war on poverty in the longer flow of American history, particularly the surging economic equality that we have seen so strikingly in recent decades and certainly in our own day. And the fourth of my slides is a cartoon that might leave us feeling a little bit gloomy about what's been achieved over the past 6 decades. But I want certainly to conclude on a high note. I want to call attention to the fact that all of your work every day, and certainly our event today, makes clear that the war on poverty lives on in crucial ways. And perhaps that the original inspiration for the 1964 legislation continues to echo through ongoing anti-poverty work. I look forward to trying to address any questions and perhaps to chiming back in a little bit. But for now, Denise, I want to turn the floor back over to you. I'm not sure if Mike Gillette has joined us or if we will proceed with the audio clips.
Yeah, it looks like Mike has joined us. Mike, are you able to hear us? If you can unmute.
I think
Wonderful.
I'm unmuted now.
There you are.
Mike?
If you want to turn on your camera, we'd love to see you if that's doable.
Denise, let me offer just then a really quick
Please.
introduction to my friend and frequent collaborator, Mike Gillette. Honestly, it's hard to imagine anyone better positioned to help us see the important work of CAPLAW in a broader historical perspective. Mike Gillette holds his BA and PhD from the University of Texas at Austin. Shortly after earning his bachelor's, he worked as a VISTA volunteer for 2 years in a model cities program based in Worcester, Massachusetts. And in later years, he joined the staff of the LBJ Presidential Library, where he led the oral history program that enabled him to conduct extensive interviews with the likes of Lady Bird Johnson, Sargent Shriver, Hubert Humphrey, and many, many others. Mike went on after that to serve as 12 years as the director of the Center for Legislative Archives at the National Archives and Records Administration, before coming back to Austin in 2003 as the executive director of Humanities Texas, which is the state's affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Along the way, Mike published 2 really important books of oral histories, including one that's especially relevant to today's program, Launching the War on Poverty, an oral history that Mike published in 2012. Mike, it's great to have you. Thank you for being here. Over to you.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for your generous words. I don't think I would be so kind.
Well deserved.
We're glad you're with us, Mike. Thank you so much for joining us. I know we have some of your audio clips primed and ready to go. I think your first one, you may want to make a bit of an introduction about yourself and your work. Love to hear a little bit about the writing that you've done about LBJ. And then I think the first clip is about convincing Sergeant Shriver to come on over and run the Office of Economic Opportunity, but we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, now let's see if I can find that link.
We have it primed up on our side, I believe. All you have to do is introduce it. Yep.
Well, good. That's I've got my so this is LBJ's phone conversation with Sergeant Shriver, enlisting him to head the war on poverty. Okay, is that the passage you have in mind?
That's my understanding. Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right.
So we'll ask our team to go ahead and play that clip.
Sure.
Mr. President?
Yeah.
Sarge, the more I think about this, the more I really would like to suggest once again that you give me a few more days to get this thing straightened out so that when it is announced, I can make some sense about it. I talked to Bill about it, and he said there were a few other things that you could talk about at this press conference, which would give me a chance to get myself straightened out. You know, I've only been back here 24 hours or 48 hours, and it's exceedingly difficult to have any grasp of what I can do about this or even how to get it started. And I feel honestly that it would be I wouldn't be able to do the kind of job for you on this thing that I want to do, because I want to do it right. And everybody has sort of a way of doing something and making it a success. And I want, if I get in it, I want to do it successfully for you. And I just feel that if I get stuck out there today in a position where I'm completely exposed without...
Why don't you let me leave it where we were now? I'm here with all this staff trying to get ready for this 3 o'clock meeting, and I haven't had my lunch. Why don't you just let me leave it where we had it a while ago? Bill doesn't know what we've got, and we need that, and I need it for very personal reasons, and I don't see that it's going to... I'm going all the way on both of them as I suggested.
Yes.
And I don't see how that could adversely affect anything.
But the only thing is, I just feel that I won't be able to be able to do the kind of job for you. I want to do it right.
I feel like you will, and I'm the one that has to be satisfied, and I have no doubt, but I don't think this could possibly adversely affect that, as long as you have both situations taken care of, and I want to head off some. And
Okay.
I think this will do it.
And next we go to Sergeant Shriver's oral history interview, in which he talks about taking on this assignment for LBJ. You have that link?
Did he want you to give up the Peace Corps?
No, he said to me, I made that argument, needless to say. He said, listen, Sarge, you're not half the man I think you are if you can run both those jobs very easily. I remember it just as if it happened 20 minutes ago.
Now, he had taken Bill Moyer as your deputy.
That's right.
So,
that's right. So that was his attitude. He didn't want me to give up the Peace Corps.
Yeah.
He wanted me to run both of them. And I said, well, you can't do that. It's illegal. And he said, well, we'll get that. We'll take care of that. Somewhere around here, I have a funny letter. I don't know whether it's in this office now or where it is. From him to me, saying that in accordance with title such and such, statute such and such, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, your compensation will be zero. Not many people have that, because it is illegal to pay a guy for 2 jobs. In fact, I wasn't getting paid for either one because I was $1 a year man for the Peace Corps. And that's all I needed would be $1 a year man for 2 jobs at the same time.
A real bargain.
Yes, that's right. That was probably the reason why I got the job. Oh, God.
Mike, maybe you could tell us a little bit about, because some of the audio is older, right? So some of it doesn't always go across the airwaves as well as we would like. Many of us have heard Johnson in the past, and we've heard Shriver. So now, they get into it a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about what your impressions are of those 2 conversations?
Well, of course, LBJ is trying hard to enlist Sergeant Shriver in this very significant role. This gives LBJ a very popular representative from the Kennedy family. And so I'm sure Johnson is looking at that element. And also Shriver was an independent. He wasn't a blood relative. He was married, of course, to one of the Kennedy women, but Shriver was more independent of the Kennedy clan. So there were a lot of reasons that Sergeant Shriver appealed to Lyndon Johnson for this assignment.
He married in. You got to love that, right? Find your way in one way or the other. We understand you met Sergeant Shriver. For many folks on the phone today or on the webinar today, Sergeant Shriver also holds a close place in our hearts in addition to LBJ. What are your thoughts and what was your impression meeting Sergeant Shriver?
Oh, I admired him. Most of the interviews, I think we did 5 interviews, and I believe they were all done at his law firm where he practiced law in Washington. But he was very focused on this topic and devoted a lot of his time, valuable time and energy in trying to recall those events. I think I probably gave him what documentation I had that would supplement his memory and help with that. But I believe we did 5 interviews, and each one was probably close to 2 hours, just guessing. So they were substantial interviews. And in any event, he had a great sense of humor. He was always fun to talk to, self-deprecating often, but a very valuable source, particularly for this topic. Okay, the war on poverty.
And LBJ used, he was quite the legislative guru, and he obviously knew how to twist an arm. What do you think, looking back, was the most effective piece that LBJ had in his back pocket to get Sarge to agree to run, to, I guess, do both jobs, as he said? What was in LBJ's toolbox that he put to use?
Well, I can't think of a better assignment for Shriver than the war on poverty. Yeah. It was it would give him a chance to do something independent of the Kennedy family. It would be something that would have national significance, and also, of course, Shriver had this huge network of people that he could bring into the war on poverty too. That was another thing. A lot of these people were people who were colleagues or friends of Shriver, so he was able to put his stamp on the poverty program.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
he was
also,
the right person. Go ahead.
The thing about Shriver, he had a lot of friends on the Hill in Congress, and that was important. that was important to Johnson. It was important to Shriver, and it was certainly essential in terms of keeping the war on poverty funded for those years.
Yeah, critical, critical. The next set of clips is focusing on the White House Task Force. Is there anything you want to set the stage for before we play these next clips?
I think we have, if I'm following you correctly, I think we have interviews or excerpts of interviews with 3 of the people who worked for Shriver on the War on Poverty Task Force: Ann Hamilton, John Steedman, and Robert Lampman. Are those the ones that you are referring to?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Yep.
And these were interesting people. The context is they all had significant jobs in Washington, but all 3 of them devoted time after their jobs in the evenings to come over and help plan the war on poverty. This was something they did at night. It was very much a nocturnal activity because all of these people had jobs at other federal agencies during the daylight hours. But that's something that's interesting about this War on Poverty Task Force. So much of the decisions and the innovations that were made were done in the evening because that's when these people were all there at the Peace Corps. This all took place in the Peace Corps headquarters in Washington. But you had a nocturnal group in there planning these programs. Ann Hamilton, John Steedman, Robert Lampman, those were 3 of the people that I had interviewed, and they talked about how free-flowing and open and unstructured all of their deliberations were in those days, and how refreshing it must have been to be able to come in with creativity and not be tied down by something that was already set in stone. But all of those people had wonderful memories of that time. They enjoyed reminiscing about those months where they were working, day jobs and then working a night job on the poverty program.
Well, it's a little ironic. I hear from a lot of current community action leaders that a lot of the best ideas happen after hours when gathered together, letting the juices flow. So we're going to go ahead and play these 3 clips. Taylor?
Sure.
It was a very open, very free-flowing, very unstructured in the early days kind of place where ideas were freely and hotly exchanged. Those are characteristics that I associate with Shriver. That he came in, as he had done to the Peace Corps, without preconceptions, didn't mind, indeed encouraged debate, brought in all kinds of people with all kinds of ideas. Another interesting thing in the early days, I recall, he turned an awful lot to another Shriverism, he turned an awful lot to his friends, colleagues, and contacts in the business community.
That's certainly true.
Their ideas on this kind of administrative thing, on the theory that they knew how to solve problems. They were essentially problem solvers. You set yourself an objective in the business world and went out and achieved it, and there was no reason why that shouldn't apply to an administrative challenge like eradicating poverty. So there were all kinds of millionaires popping in and out for a day at a time.
Now, John Steedman was recruited from the Department of Justice, and likewise, he was spending these evenings at the Peace Corps, and he describes it as absolutely chaotic. People were running all over, and he said, what an extraordinarily exciting time it was for him to just be part of this nervous energy. So, and you probably have a voice clip from Stedman here too.
I think he's next. Yeah. Why don't we go ahead and play that?
I went over to this place in the Peace Corps, which was just absolutely chaotic. People were just running all over. And I just remember it was an extraordinarily exciting time for me.
So that's his. And then I have one more participant in these late night meetings at the Robert Lampman. His quote, I've got it here on the video for you, so let's play that quote.
Remarkable and memorable about it was not only this great enthusiasm and infectious spirit of Sergeant Shriver, but all the people who came out of the woodwork to give a cheer for this sort of thing. And they were ministers of the gospel and radicals like Paul Jacobs and people from all persuasions, it seemed, that who would volunteer. They go out of their way to come and say what a good idea this was and what an important thing it was for a rich country to do. And
Lampman was on the staff of the Council of Economic Advisors, and he was close to Walter Heller, which gave him some clout with the administration. So
I heard millionaires, radicals, and ministers in those last few clips. That is and the word chaotic. Put all that into the mix, right? Trying to figure out what's going to work, what we can really do, and where we can move the needle. Fantastic. And I think the next clips are focused on drafting the actual legislation of the Economic Opportunity Act with William Cannon. Anything you'd want to preface this clip with?
Yeah, and Adam Yarmolinsky was involved in this too, and unfortunately he got separated from the program ultimately, and that was unfortunate for the War on Poverty to lose him. But let's hear Cannon's description, because
the way I reason it
he
is
was
that
very much
someone
involved, as you could tell. Go ahead.
told Adam, others undoubtedly told him, you need a bill. So in typical fashion, Yarmolinsky being a lawyer himself, he said, well, if I need a lawyer, if I need a bill, I need a lawyer. And then I need the government's lawyer who drafts bills. Who's the government's lawyer who drafts bills? Well, it was Schley over. So, Norm, draft a bill. I don't think Norm had ever drafted a bill from the beginning at any rate, but that's all right. So there, I sat there with Schley and Stedman, and there were people trooping in and out. And as I said, we had a separate caucus of the people I mentioned. Well, I guess I wasn't on tape then, but we sat there and we drafted from Friday noon to Sunday night or something, and we had a bill for a meeting on either Monday or Tuesday of the chief participants. I mean, all the agency heads, the Wirtzes and the Celebretzes and the Cohens and so on. Yarmolinsky chaired the meeting to clear the legislation.
Yeah, you needed a bill. That's what I heard.
Yeah.
We sat there and we
one of the questions I raised with Sergeant Shriver was his Peace Corps experience applicable or critical in formulating the community action program, and you'll hear his response now.
Let's go ahead and play that.
It was applicable or critical in the formulation of the War on Poverty. Say community action ideas or anything.
Well, let me just say that that's a huge question. Sorry. But there were many, many things in the Peace Corps which were applicable to the war against poverty, and you put your finger right on one of them right away. And that was what we called in the war against, in the Peace Corps, we called it community development. Now, in fact, doing community development in Ecuador the concept of going into Ecuador to try to help people to solve their own problems and to energize them, motivate them, assist them to be able to handle their own problems themselves is no different than the psychology you take into West Virginia or to the South Bronx.
And many community action agencies are involved in community development to this day. That is a core element of community level change. It's great to hear that in those clips. I think our next two clips expound a little bit more on community action. Anything you'd want to preface these with, Mike?
This is I think we start with with Norb Schley describing how the planners saw community action. It was a concept that had all sorts of ideas associated with it, but no two people that you talk to had the same explanation. It was what was once described as grabbing a different part of the elephant. So why don't you play the clip if you have it?
It was a concept that had various ideas associated with it. But any two people you talked to about what a community action program was and what was important about it would grab hold of a different part of the elephant. The community action program was in many respects an outgrowth of the experience that the Juvenile Delinquency Committee had over the past several years. And they had concluded that if you wanted to do anything effective, you had to involve various people, including the target population, the local officials. If you tried to come in from on high and do something effective about a problem like juvenile delinquency, you were going to fail. And in order to make a lasting impact, you had to get everybody singing from the same sheet music, so to speak, and being mutually supportive, and that was a key input in the development of what became the community action program and the statute.
I will say, Mike, that's fantastic to hear some of those quotes from many years ago and from some of our founders, and I hope people in the room, right? No two people can describe their own community action program or their community action agency in the same way. It's all part of, which part of the elephant are you touching, right? That metaphor, it applies today, right? Because poverty in every community is unique. And people will say, Denise, I need an elevator speech for community action. Well, that elephant's a big elephant. So which part are you going to talk about today? And I love the idea of singing from the same sheet music. That is for sure.
Well, another poverty warrior was Christopher Weeks, who came from the Bureau of the Budget. He had drafted the Peace Corps legislation, and so he was enlisted to draft the War on Poverty. Let's hear some of his clip if you've got that.
Yep.
The specific theses that came from the juvenile delinquency program were first that the local organizations concerned in the initial instance, of course, with juvenile delinquency, had to get together. The maximum feasible participation thesis was a little less present in the juvenile delinquency program and came more out of the specific feelings of Dick Boone and others in the government at the time, Sandy Kravitz, Sanford Kravitz being another major thinker, which obviously calls for something called maximum feasible participation.
It's interesting to hear somebody frame it as something called maximum feasible participation, because Mike, today, right, that's a framing that we're very familiar with in community action. We hang our hat on that every day through our board structure and engaging people in the community, in the work, in the governance of the work. Is there anything you'd add to that concept of maximum feasible participation?
Well, that was an expression that we heard all the time in talking about OEO, the War on Poverty, and I think the Office of Economic Opportunity borrowed a lot of strategies and descriptions from other agencies that were already more established. Let's listen to a quote from Christopher Weeks. He came from the Bureau of the Budget, and he had drafted the Peace Corps legislation. We've got a snippet from him.
President Johnson may have thought that the way community action was going to work was going to be working with local government. But frankly, that never was my idea.
This is Shriver. This
My
is
idea
Sergeant
always was.
I think we're going back.
Okay.
The specific theses that came from the juvenile delinquency program.
This is Christopher Weeks.
That the local organizations concerned in the initial instance, of course, with juvenile delinquency, had to get together. The maximum feasible participation thesis was a little less present in the juvenile delinquency program and came more out of the specific feelings of Dick Boone and others.
I think we just heard this one, so maybe we should go ahead and skip ahead to the piece from that Shriver was speaking to. I think that was leaning into around through local government, possibly the Board of Education.
Right.
Why don't we go ahead and play that one?
Okay.
I think that President Johnson may have thought that the way community action was going to work was going to be working with local government. But frankly, that never was my idea. And my idea always was, by analogy, that it would be like a local board of education. This was not the poor community versus the rich community, or the business community versus the labor community.
Where was Shriver going with the rest of that quote, do you think? I know that was a really short clip. How would you compare the Board of Education to what Shriver's vision was for community action?
Well, I think Shriver had a more expansive view of community action than President Johnson did. LBJ was probably thinking in a more restricted sense, whereas Shriver and he would proceed to make the most of the community action program. And this is a very interesting line of discussion, because you see all of these people who helped plan the community action program, and they all had not necessarily opposing ideas, but some differing ideas. So if you put all of these together, it brought in a lot of new energy and insight to the entire Johnson presidency. It certainly brought a lot of momentum that might have not been there otherwise, frankly.
Well, interesting because, right, LBJ was a legislative guru. He knew how to get legislation passed. He knew how to get the votes. And Shriver was much more we know how to make it really work out in the real world and who we needed to bring to the table. So that those powers together seem to have taken that chaos and made sense of it.
Absolutely. And likewise, Shriver had the personal appeal that would bring a lot of these people into play that otherwise would not have signed on as they did. But going to LBJ as the ultimate legislator and the war on poverty, there's a lot that we can focus on here. If you look at the passage of the Economic Opportunity Act, the War on Poverty Act, they had, I would say, 96 Democrats that could have been potential opponents, and 138 Republicans. This is in the House, for a total of 234 opposition votes. And for the 64 Civil Rights Act, you had 96 Democrats who voted against it and 34 Republicans. So here you had some very tight differentiations between passage and failure. Now, LBJ had the good fortune of having Lawrence O'Brien, as the guy that headed congressional relations for the Johnson White House. And one of the quotes that we have, a conversation between LBJ and Larry O'Brien. I don't know whether you have that on your. It's about Phil Landrum, the senator from.
Number 13. I'm seeing the cue to our folks on the other side. It's clip number 13. If folks want to, if people behind the scenes want to play that one, there's a lot of clips. So
that's a good one.
It still is, it seems to me.
Poverty bill, been exploring just how we would hit it committee-wise in the House, and of course the bill would undoubtedly go to the Education and Labor Committee, and we have Adam chairing that. Now, we had thought about the possibility of establishing a select committee and have concluded that'd be extremely difficult. Then there was another alternative. As you know, Phil Landrum has never taken a position on a subcommittee since Paul has been chairman of that committee. Now, Phil would be awfully pleased to chair a subcommittee given this assignment, and I think would do one whale of a job, and I have reason to believe at this point that Powell would acquiesce to that. And I just wanted to mention it to you. If there was any other thought in your mind, if you feel this procedure is okay, I'll follow through on it.
He's talking to LBJ.
Yeah, Phil, I think, would enthusiastically work on it, and I think it would make a hell of an impact, frankly, on the floor to have Phil handling it.
I think it would on the floor. If you handle it, I'm afraid you'd kill it.
Oh, no. No, I've talked to Phil. And Phil, I am very confident would do one whale of a job with it. But we haven't made any decisions on it. I thought at this point that at least you ought to know that we're kind of playing around the fringes of this, because otherwise, I honestly don't know how we would bypass the Education and Labor Committee. The only way would be to get a select committee. But frankly, that's got a lot of difficulties obviously attached to that. So this is one route, at least, that we could have in mind. And I know Phil is enthusiastic, is anxious to do everything he can if we should travel this route. And off our experience with Phil over the last couple of years, he's been terrific.
Well, I'd go that way then. I'd talk to Cyber about it.
All right.
That sounds all right to me if you're sure of Phil.
Yeah.
Landrum
is a
conservative Georgia Democrat, so you can see why LBJ was reluctant to lean too heavily on him. But we have also a telephone conversation with regard to George Mahon, who was a very powerful member of the House Appropriations Committee. This Mahon was from West Texas. And this is LBJ talking to him, pressuring him to support the War on Poverty bill.
Got to get you to help me on my poverty. Albert, this damned Albert Thomas now, said he's going to follow me on. I got 195 votes. Charlie Haddock has told them all that you leave the Republican Party if you vote for this. We won't give you a dime. We won't do anything. I've taken it up from 10 agencies. I put it all in one bill. I got the best administrator up there, Sergeant Shriver. I got 195 votes. I got Mendel Rivers this afternoon, which is 196. Now, I have counted you, and I've counted Thomas. Now, somebody saw Thomas today, and Thomas said, well, I've been thinking about this thing, and
And I just believe I'll follow my chairman. And I'll get you the money, but I just have to follow my chairman, and he hadn't made up his mind.
Well, I've been very quiet.
Well, you just be quiet. You get something else. You vote against me on a dozen things, but for God's sakes, we only got 5 in the Texas delegation against us at this moment. Dowdy and Fisher and Burleson. By God, he never can vote for this. I don't know why.
Well, I've been very quiet. I made no statement.
I know it, but I got to have you unquiet. I've got to have you help me with something. I got old Sykes on there. You ought to help me with him some. I got I think Carl Vincent down here. He says he thinks he can help me with he got me Rivers today and maybe Hagan. I got Rivers and Macmillan against me in South Carolina, and Hardy and Downing in Virginia. You see, they pick off 4 or 5. They pick off 5 or 6 Democrats in Texas, 3 or 4 from these other states, and that winds up. That gives them 30 Democrats, and they hold a solid Republican line, and they rub my nose in it. I passed it 2-1 in the Senate, 2-1. I got 10 Republican votes for it in the Senate. And every one of these boys that work on this job will become taxpayers, and when they get out of here, instead of tax eaters. And I got a good program if they'll just let me do it. And they're riding every damn district. And I want to get these boys out of these damn cities and put them to work and have them doing something instead of loitering around breaking in store windows and everything else. And I passed it through the Rules Committee 8-7, and I passed it through the Senate, and I passed it through both committees. All the Republicans voted against me on the Labor Committee. I had 19-13, strictly party vote. Now, I've got to have a strictly party vote on the floor, and I've got to have my chairman of my Appropriations Committee to get out there and make some of these wayward fellas that get in line like old Bob Sykes. He's got every damn...
Well, we got the vibe, that's for sure. And I just will note, Mike, that we're going to be here at the top of the hour. We're going to have to wrap up here in a minute or two. But that was a great kind of strategy phone call to really kind of give us the flavor of LBJ getting those votes, right? He knew who, the what, the where, what he had to give them.
He even says to Mahon, he said, "I'll move the Navy to Lubbock," which was his home district.
Yes.
I've
been to Lubbock. I don't know how you move the Navy there myself, but I don't know. I don't know. Wow. He knew how to get things moving.
Oh, he did. He did.
Yeah. Whew.
And the fact that LBJ put as much personal time in getting these conservative Southern Democrats to support the poverty program, that was significant for him to use that much of his own support to get that involved.
Yep, definitely. And
yeah.
Just so much thank you for bringing your experience, your direct conversations with Sarge, the comments and the chat has been full of people really expressing their appreciation for all of this great content. And we encourage folks to visit Austin and go to the library. And Mike, can you remind us the name of your book again that talked directly to this work?
Yeah, it is.
He's even got a copy, right?
Launching the War on Poverty.
Imagine that. Launching the War on Poverty.
An oral history.
An oral history. Well, thank you so much for being part of our commemoration today. You brought LBJ to life in this moment on this, what we see as a very special day in our country's history. That the chaos, I saw Jim Masters make a comment that energy of chaos sometimes still lives today in some ways, but it's that power of putting good people in the room during hours or after hours to figure out what's going to work, and then leveraging that power that needs to be leveraged to move things forward. So before I turn it back over to Delitzo for some final remarks, Mike, any last comments you'd want to leave with our Community Action Network on this 60th anniversary?
No, I'm just delighted to know that Community Action is still as influential in this nation as it is, because that means a lot, I'm sure, to many people.
Well, thank you for that. This network is amazing in terms of the breadth of depth, experience, dedication, and passion. This network will not stop until we eliminate these causes and conditions of poverty. We go upstream and we dismantle the artificial hierarchy based on race in this country and dismantle the structural barriers that cause barriers for people not to move and be economically mobile in their own lives. So thank you again for being with us. Thank you for your work and dedication. Thank you for your book. I'm going to turn over to Delitzo to make some final remarks. Delitzo, thank you again also for being with us here today. Delitzo?
Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mark, to the Lyndon Baines Johnson Presidential Library. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you to the network that participated in this webinar. Again, today is indeed a historical day for us as a movement. We look forward to seeing you all in Seattle next week as we continue with this commemoration of our work. One thing I always say to myself is if there were no community action, there would be millions more people in poverty today. So the work that you do every day continues to transform lives, and we will continue to do this work until poverty is eliminated in America. Thank you and take care.
Yeah.